They stood outside my apartment holding a store-bought pie after banning me from Thanksgiving the year before. I didn't open the door. I didn't even wave. I just turned away. Because this year, I wasn't the one left out. Hi, I'm Rachel. Last year, my family said my energy was too heavy and asked me not to come. So I stayed home. And something inside me shifted. I started keeping track, not of what I lost, but of everything I'd given. And I realized I'd never really been invited. I'd only ever been useful. Have you ever had to walk away from family just to feel seen? Tell me, what would you do if the people who hurt you suddenly wanted back in? The cinnamon still clung to the air like it didn't realize it had overstayed its welcome. The pie rested on the cooling rack, golden and steaming gently, its crust catching the last bit of afternoon light that filtered through my kitchen window. I hadn't even taken off my coat. My scrubs were wrinkled beneath it, a hospital badge still clipped to my chest. The apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the radiator. Thanksgiving Eve always felt sacred in its own small way, not this year. The phone rang just as I reached for the oven mitts. I glanced down. Daniel. I answered, expecting him to ask if I was bringing the sweet potato casserole too. His voice was too cheerful, the kind that people wear like a raincoat when they know a storm's coming. "Hey, Rach, so listen," he began, stretching the word like he needed to warm up to the point. "Avery's been feeling a little off lately. You know, energy stuff. She's really sensitive, and with your work and how heavy things have felt, we just thought maybe it's best if you sat this one out." I didn't speak right away. I looked at the pie, at the folded green sweater on top of my half-zipped suitcase, at the 3 gift bags lined neatly by the door, Dad's bourbon, Mom's lotion from that fancy place she never buys for herself, Daniel's favorite pecan bars I made from scratch. "Okay," I said, "just that. Nothing more." He paused, surprised maybe, then chuckled in that awkward way he does when he thinks something unpleasant has passed easily. "Yeah. Okay, great. Love you, sis. We'll talk soon." The call ended. I stood there a moment longer, the pie cooling beside me, my hand still holding the phone. The radiator hissed again. A slow breath escaped me. An hour later, Mom called. "Honey," she began, syrup thick and soft, the kind of tone she used when asking for favors or delivering blows wrapped in tissue paper. "We're just trying to make things easy for everyone, okay? You know how Avery is. If you show up, it might just confuse things." I swallowed a dry lump that sat somewhere between anger and disbelief. "It's fine," I said again. There was a pause, as if she was surprised by my calm. "Okay, well, happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." I didn't say it back. She hung up before I could. The pie sat untouched on the counter. I folded the sweater, placed it back in the drawer. The gift bags I moved into the hall closet. I unplugged the string of white lights I had draped over the window earlier that morning. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. Instead, I walked to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. One by one, I navigated to each auto transfer I'd set up over the years. The house maintenance account for Mom and Dad's place, canceled. Daniel's monthly credit buffer, canceled. Mom's therapy copay, which I'd been covering quietly since 2019, canceled. The radiator clicked again as the temperature dipped. I shut the laptop, pushed it aside, and opened the drawer next to me. From inside, I pulled out a legal pad, yellowed and slightly curled at the edges. I found a pen that still worked and, at the top of the page, wrote in neat block letters, 2015, Daniel's rent, first month when he missed the deposit. Then, 2016, new tires for Dad's truck, 2017, roof repair after ice storm. The pen moved slowly, but my hand didn't shake. The memories weren't dramatic, just heavy, like snow building on a roof until something creaks, until something gives. I got up once more, walked to the kitchen. The pie's crust had softened slightly but still smelled like comfort. I covered it with foil and placed it gently into the fridge. There was no ceremony in it, just habit. Back at my desk, I continued writing. Line after line. Birthday gifts, emergency calls, forgotten thank you notes. My handwriting was smaller now, more cramped. The radiator hissed again, and I welcomed the sound. It was the only thing that didn't ask for anything from me. They had made the choice easy this year. For once, I wouldn't have to explain why I didn't show up, why I stayed home. They decided for me. And in their choosing, something settled in me. Still, but not empty. I didn't need to be loud about it. Not all rebellions come with shouting. Some begin with the quiet scribble of a pen on an old yellow pad. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I folded the turkey socks and placed them back in the drawer. I unplugged the soft glow window lights I'd strung up yesterday morning, coiling the wire carefully and laying it in a box labeled seasonal. Everything in its place, even disappointment. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the radiator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Outside, the snow kept falling. No wind, no drama, just a steady, determined descent. I watched it from the window for a few minutes, arms crossed, tea cooling on the table. I'd made cinnamon chamomile this time. I didn't bother sweetening it. I walked back to my desk and picked up the yellow pad from the night before. The list was where I left it. One entry per year, like chapters in a book no one had asked me to write, but everyone had expected me to memorize. 2015, Daniel's rent. First month, missed freelance deposit. 2016, brakes for Dad's truck. 2017, roof repair, ice storm. 2018, Thanksgiving groceries. Mom had forgotten her wallet. 2019, Mom's therapy copay started 2020. Daniel's dental bill, no insurance. 2021, backyard fence fix after storm. 2022, Avery's art supplies. Birthday gift, 2023, bourbon, pie, gifts, time off. The pen moved on its own now, my hand steady. I could feel the weight of each year not as a burden, but as a truth. I'd never kept track before, never thought to. Love didn't come with receipts. Or maybe I'd just believed that long enough to keep from questioning how one-sided it had become. I paused. A flicker of memory. I was maybe 10. Standing on a step stool beside Mom, peeling sweet potatoes for the casserole. She handed me the peeler without looking, already focused on Daniel, who sat at the table with glue sticks and construction paper, writing names on place cards. He spelled Grandma with a backwards R. Everyone laughed, said it was adorable. When I brought home straight A's the next week, Dad looked up from the paper and said, "Good job, honey," then returned to the sports section. Later that night, I found Daniel's place cards taped on the fridge. Mine had gone into the recycling. Back in the present, I walked over to the closet and pulled out the storage bin where I kept holiday items. I laid the socks on top, the ones with tiny cartoon turkeys wearing pilgrim hats. Every year, I'd give Daniel a pair just for the tradition of it. He'd laugh, say thanks, and promptly forget where they came from. He never remembered, but I always brought them anyway. I stared at the bin a moment longer, then peeled a blank white label and wrote 2 words with a black marker: unused traditions. I sealed the lid and slid it back into the closet. Later that afternoon, I opened a drafted message on my phone. It was one of those generic holiday texts. Wishing you all warmth and joy today. Grateful for the people who matter. I'd written it late last night, out of reflex more than sincerity. My thumb hovered over send. Then I hit delete. No outreach. No performance of peace. Not this year. I returned to the desk and flipped the pad to a new page. I wasn't sure why, but the act of writing helped. It made me feel like I was reclaiming space I'd given up too easily. I started a list, not of things I gave, but things I let go of. The apology I never received for Dad missing my graduation, the framed photos where I stood at the edge, the holiday where they forgot to make a vegetarian dish, even though I'd told them twice. The time Daniel asked for help moving, and I showed up in the rain, only to find he'd invited 5 friends but not saved me a parking spot. The messages left unread, the gifts passed off as from the family when I'd picked and paid for them myself. Line after line I wrote. There's a heaviness that comes from remembering too clearly, but there's also a kind of lightness in saying, "This happened. I didn't imagine it." When I looked up again, the daylight had dimmed into that gray-blue shadow of evening, the kind that wraps a room in quiet. I walked to the kitchen and reheated my tea, though it didn't need it. It wasn't about warmth. It was about ceremony. The small rituals that told me I was still here, still deserving of care, even if it only came from myself. I lit a candle by the window. The label said, "Spiced Cider." The scent filled the room in soft waves, sweet, cozy, hopeful. But to me, it just smelled like trying too hard. Aunt Grace never called unless it was important. Her voice on the other end was gentle, a little shaky, like she'd rehearsed the first sentence a few times before dialing. "She recognized you," she said. I paused, unsure I'd heard right. The tea in my mug had gone cold again. I didn't move to warm it. "She who?" I asked. "Avery, Daniel's girlfriend, the one who—" She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. "She saw a photo of you, the one on the mantel from your 9th birthday, the green sweater with the crooked tree on it. She looked at it and said, 'That's Dr. Rachel Monroe. She saved my grandmother's life.'" I blinked. My mouth opened, then closed. I hadn't heard my full name spoken like that in weeks. Not Dr. Monroe, not in this house, not since. "She said it out loud," Aunt Grace continued, "at the table, in front of everyone." I imagined it. The long dining table with its seasonal runner, mismatched chairs tucked beneath, wine glasses half full, forks mid-air, and then Avery's voice cutting through the ritual. "That's Dr. Rachel Monroe. She saved my grandmother." A silence so sharp it could slice butter. I wanted to ask what happened next, but I didn't. Aunt Grace filled the space anyway. "I don't know what your mother said, or Daniel, but Avery gathered her coat and purse, thanked everyone, and left." Just like that. I stood at the window, one hand pressed lightly against the glass. Outside, the sky had turned a soft, bruised purple, the kind of color that feels like a sigh. Snowflakes moved like ash, light, reluctant. The candle on my shelf flickered. Avery, the same Avery who didn't want me at the table, had spoken my name. Not in judgment, in gratitude, and not to me, but to them. A few hours later, I saw the post. Avery didn't name names, just a quiet paragraph buried between studio updates and new gallery pieces. A reflection, maybe, or a reckoning. Sometimes the people you're told to avoid are the ones who show up when no one else does. Sometimes the version of someone you've been handed isn't the truth at all. It sat there, simple and still. Then the comments started. Fellow artists, small collectors, people I recognized from the margins of Daniel's world, now sharing, resharing, liking. The words found traction. And then came the email. Subject, "Let's reset things." I stared at the bold text in my inbox. It floated there like a piece of fruit left out too long. Polished skin, rotten core. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I already knew the tone, soft concern, layered guilt, and somewhere by paragraph 3, the ask. I imagined the phrasing. We've all been under a lot of stress. Things were said that weren't meant. Let's not dwell on the past. Number not today. I closed the laptop gently, the way you might set down a cracked plate, careful not to make it worse. My fingers hovered for a moment on the lid before pulling away. I looked around my apartment. The string lights were still tucked in a box. The pie remained untouched in the fridge. But something felt different, not lighter in the festive way, but in the way a burden shifts when you realize it never belonged to you. It wasn't that I'd been seen, it was that I'd been named, for the first time, truthfully, without anyone else's narrative reshaping me. For years, I'd kept my head down, made the pie, paid the bills, swallowed the slights, all under the quiet belief that someday, maybe I'd be acknowledged, that if I just stayed useful, someone would say, "She matters." But Avery, of all people, had said it not because she was family, not because she owed me anything, but because she remembered, because her memory was tied not to obligation but to care. I walked over to the window again, watching the soft trail of snow blur the streetlights. My tea was still cold. I didn't warm it this time. It felt honest, in a strange way. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still, and still was enough. The subject line read, "Let's reset things." That was the phrase. Neat, polished, almost harmless, like a napkin folded over something unsightly. I hovered over it for a moment. It was from Mom's email, but the wording had all three of them stamped across it. Daniel's casual deflections, Dad's calculated phrasing, Mom's honey-dipped attempts to soften the sharp edges. I clicked it open. The first paragraph was warm, intentionally vague. "We've all been under a lot of stress. This time of year can bring up so much emotion." Then a gentle pivot. "We just want to move forward as a family." The second paragraph did what they always did. It minimized the thing while framing themselves as the ones offering grace. "There's been some confusion about what was said during dinner. We know you've been under pressure, too." Then came the ask. Paragraph 3. I knew it before I read it. "If you could perhaps clarify with Avery. It seems she's misinterpreted a few things. Daniel's gallery relationships are being impacted." There it was. They didn't want healing. They wanted hygiene. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about image. The same old story, polish the outside, bury the mess, and call it love. I closed the laptop, not harshly, just with a finality that came from knowing I wouldn't be responding. The sky outside had turned that low, dull gray that makes you check the clock twice. It felt like the day had given up on itself. I got up to warm my tea, not because I wanted to drink it, but because the act gave my hands something to do. Halfway to the kitchen, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, hospital prefix. I answered. "Dr. Monroe," a familiar voice said. "It's Marcus Hill, from the gala this past spring." "Yes, of course. Good to hear from you." He cleared his throat. "I just wanted to make you aware. I received a message from your father this morning." I didn't speak. I waited. He reached out to Human Resources, expressed concern that you might be experiencing emotional instability, suggested you may need a leave of absence. Silence. He didn't cite specific behavior, Marcus added quickly. And to be transparent, nothing in his message warranted formal follow-up, but I felt you should know. I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was overwhelmed, but because the quiet inside me had settled into something immovable. Not sadness, not anger. Clarity. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'm sorry you had to hear it from me." "No," I replied. "I'm glad it was you." Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't offer advice. He simply said, "If you ever need anything, professional or otherwise, you have people here." That was all, and it was enough. I hung up and stared at the wall for a while. The radiator clicked in the background, its familiar rhythm oddly comforting. My apartment, once a holding space between work and obligation, now felt like shelter, real shelter. Then 3 knocks at the door, not loud, not rushed, just deliberate. I walked over quietly. I didn't peek right away. I already knew. Still, when I looked through the peephole, there they were. Mom bundled in her camel coat, holding a Tupperware container like a peace offering. Dad, hands deep in his pockets, eyes darting. Daniel, half a step back, weight shifting like he wasn't sure if he wanted to be seen or disappear. I didn't open the door, not fully, just an inch. Enough to let them know I was there. Enough to take them in. Mom smiled first, thin and practiced. "Hi, sweetheart. We thought maybe we could—" I didn't let her finish. My voice was low, steady. "I see you." Her face shifted, not in surprise, but in discomfort. Dad's lips pressed into a near frown. Daniel looked down at his shoes. I held the door open just a breath longer. Then I shut it. No slam, no final word. Just the click of the lock sliding back into place. Behind it, the hallway fell silent. I leaned my back against the door, eyes closed. The tea was still warm in the kitchen. The light outside was fading. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was locked in. I felt like I was safe. "We brought leftovers," Mom said, like that could rewrite history. Her voice carried that practiced warmth she always used when offering cookies after a cruel remark. She held the Tupperware in both hands, like it was fragile, sacred even. The plastic lid fogged slightly in the cold air. She smiled as if we were picking up a conversation we'd merely paused. Behind her, Dad shifted his weight, hands deep in his coat pockets. His expression was neutral, unreadable, as always. Daniel stood a half step behind them both, eyes locked on the floor. He hadn't looked at me once. I didn't respond. Mom tried again. "We just thought, maybe we could talk a little, clear the air." The words were soft, chosen for their lack of weight. She didn't mention the emails. She didn't mention the call to my workplace. She didn't ask how I was. Dad gave a small nod. It might have meant agreement. It might have meant, let's get this over with. I couldn't tell. I looked at Daniel. His eyes flicked up for half a second before returning to the ground. No apology there, just discomfort. And I realized something in that silence. This wasn't about me. This wasn't about love or even regret. It was about containment, about keeping things neat, about image. Once I would have opened the door just because they said my name, just because they remembered I existed. I would have taken the container, nodded politely, let them talk around the harm. I would have called it grace. But now, even my name felt borrowed, like a convenience they pulled out when it served them. I breathed in, and then I said it. No, not sharp, not loud, just solid, unshakable. Mom blinked. Her mouth opened, ready to counter, to persuade, then closed again. Dad's brow furrowed slightly. He exhaled through his nose, like a man who'd come to the wrong address. Daniel, still silent. I didn't add a follow-up. No speech, no reasons. I didn't owe them a performance. I stepped back slowly and began to close the door. They stayed frozen in place as it narrowed. I saw the glint of the container still held out like an offering, a piece I hadn't asked for. The latch clicked softly as it met the frame. Then the lock turned. I stood there for a moment, just on the other side, listening. The hum of the radiator filled the room again. On the other side of the door, footsteps shuffled, the scuff of shoes, a quiet rustle of coats. Someone, probably Dad, coughed. Then silence. They left the same way they came, without fanfare. I didn't look through the peephole to watch them go. I didn't press my ear to the wood. I didn't wonder if they'd come back. I turned and walked back toward the kitchen. My tea was still warm. That surprised me, not because I had expected the confrontation to be long, but because for the first time in years, something I cared about hadn't gone cold while I waited for someone else to decide what I deserved. I picked up the mug, held it in both hands. The ceramic felt solid, real. I moved toward the window. Outside, the light was thin, just a suggestion of gold through bare trees. It wouldn't last much longer, but for now it held. No more notes, no more lists, no more trying to make it make sense. Just this, a quiet room, a warm drink, and one word I never thought I'd be brave enough to say out loud. This year, I didn't make the pie. I made a guest list. There were no string lights in the window, no carefully wrapped gifts lined up by the door, no green sweater folded in a half-zipped suitcase. But there was warmth, real warmth. It hummed from the oven where a stranger's recipe was trying its best to crisp the top of a sweet potato bake. It drifted from the laughter spilling out of my living room, from the steam rising off a casserole dish someone's cousin had brought even though they weren't sure it would go with anything. It all went. Nothing matched, and everything belonged. Avery arrived early, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and a pie that was clearly store-bought. "I didn't even try this time," she said, smiling. "I figured you'd appreciate the honesty more than the effort." I laughed. "You figured right." She helped me set out plates and pour cider into mismatched mugs. We didn't light candles or say grace, but someone, somewhere, put on a playlist, and it turned into music that fit just right. Around the dining table, a folding table if we're being honest, sat the people who had shown up for me in quiet, consistent ways. Elise from down the hall, who once brought me soup when I had the flu. Marcus from the hospital, who'd made sure I knew I wasn't alone when things turned sour. One of my favorite patient's daughters, now a friend. Even a shy 12-year-old who lived upstairs, invited only because her single mom had to work late. She brought Oreos in a sandwich bag. They disappeared first. Later in the afternoon, I slipped away for a moment. In my bedroom, sitting on the windowsill, was a padded envelope I'd received a few days ago. Inside had been a letter, handwritten, slanted in soft ink. It was from Avery's grandmother. "You didn't just help me stay alive," she wrote. "You reminded me I mattered, that someone hadn't given up on me just because it was easier. That kind of care doesn't go unnoticed." I had read it 3 times since it arrived. Today, I framed it. Not because I needed a trophy, but because it belonged somewhere I could see it, daily, quietly reminding me that some recognition carries no noise, but all the weight. Just as I set it down, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "We're nearby, thought maybe we could stop in." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked slowly back to the living room where someone had just opened a new bottle of cider and someone else was arguing, in that friendly way, about the correct ratio of marshmallow to yam. I passed the window and paused. Across the street, they stood near their car, Linda, Charles, and Daniel. They weren't dressed for a visit, more like they were testing the air. Mom held a pie, still in its plastic box from a grocery store I didn't shop at anymore. They didn't look up, just stood there, uncertain, hovering. I didn't open the blinds wider. I didn't knock on the glass. I turned away. Back at the table, Avery raised her glass. "To chosen family," she said, and everyone echoed it with their own twist. "To neighbors. To people who show up. To this weird yam thing." Laughter. Clinks. Another round of cider poured. I lifted my glass too. Not for show, just because I meant it. For so long, I'd tried to earn space in a room that kept shrinking around me. Today, the room stretched, made wider by people who didn't need my pain to make me visible. I didn't need their permission to matter. I just needed a room that welcomed me in. Sometimes, the most powerful healing doesn't come from apologies. It comes from choosing your own peace. I stopped chasing a place at the table and built one where everyone belonged because they wanted to be there, not because they had to be. In life, love that has to be earned too often becomes love that can be revoked. But when we stop asking for permission to matter, we begin to understand our worth isn't tied to who acknowledges it, but to who truly sees it. Letting go isn't bitterness, it's clarity. If this story reminded you of your own turning point, I hope you'll share it. Because sometimes telling our stories is how we remember we're not alone,